Ben Shapiro went on Fox and Friends where he spoke about the new bipartisan spending bill in Washington. Let's see what his thoughts are.
Rand Paul, just on the substance, is exactly correct. I mean, the fact is that Republicans spent years railing against Obama deficits and Democratic deficits, and now they have power again, and they just spent an enormous sum of money. And I understand they wanted to remove sequestration on the military, but they touted that same sequestration as a big win in 2011. I was there. I remember it. So do you. And so the idea that we have to blow out the budget with a Republican majority in both houses just demonstrates once again that in the end, the American people are really inconsistent about spending. On the one hand, they say they want cuts to spending. On the other hand, the minute anyone proposes a specific cut to spending, the American people start to get very upset about it, and both parties tend to buckle to that rather than educating the public.
What are the implications of this deal then, Ben? Because a lot of people did want that military spending that has been hit by sequestration, but when it comes to debt and deficits, what is this going to mean?
I mean, it's just going to mean a continuation of deficits out till the end of time. We're going to be looking at $30 trillion debts in the near future. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that nobody wants to talk about the real drivers of the debt, and that's not military spending at all. The real driver of the debt is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. That represents about 60% of the American federal budget. The American military budget is somewhere between 18 and 20%. So the idea that if we raise the military spending, that this is somehow the great driver of the deficit is not true. I just don't understand why Republicans can't make that case. Let's have our military spending, and let's talk about restructuring some of the real issues in the economy.
So that's the cool kids philosophers take right there. That let's have our military spending. The military is great. We spend what we're spending on it, or spend maybe even more on it. But everything else, the fucking social safety net programs, the earned benefit programs, that's what we really need to cut. I love how he makes these arguments as if he's like an edgy outsider, but what he just gave you was establishment bubble wisdom 101. That's inside the Beltway standard take 101. And unfortunately, that's not just the take among the Republicans, that's also the take among many corporate Democrats, where whenever it's a program for you, it's always couched in, we have no choice. We have to cut it, but we're not even going to call it a cut. We're going to call it reforming it. We're going to reform it by maybe privatizing it or semi-privatizing it, talking about Social Security or Medicare. That's what we have. We don't have a choice. It is what it is. So, listen, the one area where I will give Ben Shapiro credit for being consistent is that he always talks about debt and deficits, and then now he's like, I still, fuck the Republicans for now not caring about the debt and the deficit now that they're in control. So he's right. They're hypocrites on that front. But then what he proposes as a solution, again, is the solution that every establishment politician in the country would give you, which is, hey, let's cut the programs for you and let's keep our military spending as is or maybe even increase it. Well, listen, the United States spends more on our military than the next 9 or 10 countries combined. And most of those countries are our allies. If we cut our military spending in half, we would still spend more than the closest competitor by 1.5 miles. So why on earth would you want to keep the spending as it is? Unless you really are a Kool-Aid drinker and you believe the United States we're the world policemen, and we care about human rights and freedom and democracy around the world, and that's why we need to fund the military budget to keep law and order. But Ben, here's the problem with that, buddy. The United States supports 73% of the world's dictatorships. We fund them, we prop them up, we arm them. We support 73% of the world's dictatorships as we argue to the world, and it's just a lie. No, we're the ones who protect democracy around the world. If you support democracy, why are you supporting Saudi Arabia? Why would you do that? Why would you support 73% of the world's dictatorships? That's a lie. We're an imperialist power, like any imperialist power that ever existed. And all we care about is our power and our control and our ability to continue to take natural resources from around the world. And we view the world as a global chessboard, and we want to maintain a position of dominance. So another area where we waste money, we have 900 military bases around the world that cost $100 billion a year to maintain. Ben Shapiro wants to keep spending that money, but then turn around and cut Grandma Barbara's Social Security and make it so that it's harder for her to get by. Ben, those are just dumb priorities, Ben. And then also, let's be honest here, when you talk about cutting Social Security, and they would call them entitlements, the reality is these are earned benefit programs. So you pay into it your whole life, and then later on in your life, you get back out of it. Now, I get it. It's not like it's equal with everybody, so some people will take out more than they put in, of course. But you still paid into it, and you should take out of it. You should get back from it. But what he wants to do is just cut that now, cut those programs, which means what? He's in favor of the government robbing you. If you're a working class person and you paid into it and then you're not going to get anything back, that's the government robbing you. Now, this is the guy I thought he would argue that taxes are a form of theft, but apparently not when you're paying into one of the most popular programs in the country, and then he decides, hey, let's slash the payouts on that program. So listen, guys, here's my point when you talk about a guy like Ben Shapiro. His policy ideas are not good for regular people. That's just objectively the case. If you're coming to cut Social Security and Medicare, and by the way, the polls show, what do Americans want to do? They do not want to cut Social Security or Medicare or education spending under almost any circumstances. So for him to argue, well, that's what we have to do. Okay, well then just admit that you don't agree with the democratic will of the American people. So you have a deeply unpopular position. Just admit that. The only place that Ben Shapiro's opinion is popular is among all the establishment corporatist politicians in Washington. That's where his position is popular. And again, I can't fathom for the life of me why anybody could look at the facts of our current military spending and go, that's great. Now let's cut the few programs that help regular people. What? Guys, did you know, we've covered this a few times on the show, but every time I bring it up, it just blows my mind. We spent over $1 trillion on the F-35-2 program, so it's the new fighter jet. Now, of course, we needed a new one because the old ones were no good. You know, the Taliban and ISIS were really running circles around us with their fucking new jets, so we needed new jets. And the F-35-2 program, from cradle to grave, the entire program is going to cost over $1 trillion. You know, Ben, if you really were a fiscal conservative, a deficit hawk, why would you not look at that and go, what the fuck is going on here? Really? The old jets weren't good enough? We needed to waste over $1 trillion on this dumbass program? And then, by the way, for the longest time, those jets weren't even able to get up off the ground. Now they can get off the ground, but it costs over $1 trillion to get us to that point. Why on earth? It's just, the priorities are just completely backwards. And then, by the way, he never gives you the context. So, you know, when you look at what it's like right now, the increase in the military budget just this year is enough to fund free college for everybody in the country. Isn't that crazy? The increase in the military budget for this year, not the whole military budget, just the increase in the military budget for this year is enough to fund free college and then some for everybody. So, again, never gives you the context, never gives you this perspective, never lets you know, hey, it's actually popular to protect these programs. And again, when you look at the specific polling, only 17% of Americans still want to stay in Afghanistan. So why would you want to, and that was a poll back from 2013, it's probably even fewer people now. So why would you want to keep doing something that only 17% of Americans support? You want to keep the military spending the same level? It doesn't make any sense. And then, a guy like Ben Shapiro would be the first one to say, if you bring up Medicare for all, we can't afford it! Can't afford Medicare for all. I mean, I don't know, you guys are crazy. I mean, we have this fiscal situation that's out of whack, and I don't know. Now, of course, what he doesn't know, or might know and doesn't care, is that if we keep our healthcare system the same, so our for-profit, private-driven health insurance system, over the next 10 years, it will cost $49 trillion. What would it cost if we did a Medicare for all system? $32 trillion. We save $17 trillion over a decade if we do Medicare for all. So, Ben, it's not that we can't afford to do Medicare for all. It's that we can't afford not to do Medicare for all. But again, He either doesn't know that or knows that and doesn't care, because whenever it's spending for you that helps you, regular person helps you, the drivers of the debt and the deficit, what are we going to do? The Republicans just passed a tax bill where 83% of the benefits go to the top 1%. Over a 10-year period, it raises taxes on everybody making $75,000 a year or less. It adds over $1 trillion to the deficit. Over $1 trillion. Why isn't Ben Shapiro saying, well, hey, we want to address this problem, just get rid of the giant mega-rich tax cut bill that just went through? No. What does he do? Grandfathers that in. Tax cuts for the rich, grandfather that in. Military spending, grandfather that in. But, what are we going to do? The few programs that help regular people, that's what we have to cut. Cool kids philosopher, my ass cheeks. Ben Shapiro. He's a younger version of Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly. He's a partisan hack that does the establishment Republican talking points that, the sycophants at Fox News want him to do. That's what he is. He just talks really fast, so he makes people think he's a hell of a lot smarter than he is. So I just need everybody to understand something. Ben Shapiro wrote an article in 2005 about the Iraq War entitled, "Why War in Iraq is Right for America." That's Ben Shapiro's take on the Iraq War. And now he's saying, what are we going to do? The debt and the deficit, what are we going to do? It's so crazy, so much. We have to cut programs for you. Well, Ben, perhaps if we didn't do that illegal offensive war against a country that didn't attack us, that broke the Middle East, gave us ISIS, and killed minimum 200,000 civilians, maybe if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have to consider that position of yours about cutting the only programs that help the American people. Because the war in Iraq, you know how much it is going to cost when all is said and done by 2053? Because we paid for the war with borrowed money, and there's interest on that, and of all the different things we have to pay for. You know how much the war in Iraq costs? $7 trillion. Ben Shapiro supported a war that cost $7 trillion. And now he wants to take away your grandma's retirement money, her Social Security. And he wants to cut back on her health care, on Medicare. Ben, go fuck yourself with a cactus. Just so everybody understands, the war on terror costs $250 million every day. And we have more terrorists now than we did when we started the war on terror. Look at how that works. It's like the war on drugs. You start the war on drugs, you flush $1 trillion down the toilet, and now we have more people doing drugs today than they were when we started the war on drugs. It's just an abject failure and a total waste of money, and people died in the process. War on terror. $250 million a day. And now we have more terrorists today than we did before the war on terror started. Abject failure. But genius philosopher Ben Shapiro, guys. Spending all that money is good. Actually, I don't know why I'm doing the proper voice for him. I should do his weaselly, fast-talking voice. Yeah, spending money on the war on terror is actually a good thing, and I need everybody to understand that the things that we really need to cut back on, it's Social Security and Medicare and, education spending. Any program for you, we really need to cut back on, but when it comes to military spending, we can have our military spending, so it doesn't matter we spend $7 trillion in Iraq and $2 trillion in Afghanistan. It doesn't matter that we spend $250 million a day. That's totally fine, and look away. Your government's taking money from you and using it to be an imperialist power and massacring innocent civilians around the world, but that's okay because I'm talking fast, so obviously I'm really smart.